We don't always have time for ourselves, but being creative is important. Van Gogh famously quoted, "If you hear a voice within you saying you cannot paint, then by all means paint, and that voice will be silenced." So add more colour to your life, and let's get painting. So I've written this tutorial for people who maybe don't have time to paint. So let me talk to you really quickly about the materials. These are spotter brushes, but use whatever you have. And the colours I've chosen for today are black, green grey, olive green, permanent red and crimson lake. These paints are by Mungo, but please use whatever you have in your palette. I've chosen these colours because I really like the muted tones, and I found that they really did sort of sit really nicely with the colours of the rose. This is the colour chart that I have, that I've made of all the colours within my set, and if you want to make one yourself to help you pick the colours that you need for your painting, then I'll link it in the top corner right now. So the line drawing and the reference photograph that you can see on your screen right now are available on our Facebook group, and you can have access to that just by joining up, and I'll put the link in the description underneath this video so that you can join in with me and paint along like this. So this is a really super fast painting tutorial. Maybe if you have a low attention span, or maybe you don't have a lot of time to paint, then this painting project shouldn't take you longer than maybe an hour or so. So if you're looking for something to do really quickly, then this is for you. So to begin with, I'm applying wet on wet, which means I'm just going to apply the water onto the paper like this, and we're going to drop in the paint onto the areas where the water has been applied. So try to stay into your pencil line. I've mixed permanent red, crimson lake and the olive green on my palette like this in a really watery consistency, and all I'm doing is dropping in that paint onto the water like this and letting it naturally splurge into the wet paper. This is going to be a really kind of looser style painting to my normal paintings, so I'm not being too fussy and I'm not following the photograph exactly as it is. I'm just doing a really relaxed style and just enjoying the process, dropping in that paint like this. Water to the base of the little glass jar here where the water is sitting, and I'm even taking the water over the stem of the rose like this. I have a watery mix of black on its own on the top and black with a tiny bit of green grey on the side there, and I'm just dropping this colour in where I feel the darker tone is needed to create the illusion of the reflection that you can see in the glass jar. Because I've worked wet and wet, the paint is naturally splurging into the water. It's naturally sort of immersing into the water, giving it that softer edge. I'm just applying the paint where I feel it is needed to create the illusion of the glass having reflection. Just dropping in that paint and letting the damp paper do its work. The brush that I'm using at the moment is a number 4 size spotter. Use whatever brushes that you're comfortable with. I particularly like these for my botanical painting, but any brush will do. And you can see already, just by adding these tiny layers of paint, the illusion of that shiny water and the glass is really apparent. And just using the tip of my brush to outline the inner rim of the jar like this. This time working wet on dry, which means I'm applying the paint directly to the paper and letting it dry. The paper that I've chosen to use today is a cold pressed paper, which means that it has a texture to it, and I particularly like this kind of paper, but use what you have. You can see me here applying the water to the bottom of the jar like this, and then just leaving a little gap at the front where the reflection is shining, where the sun is shining that beautiful glass jar. We want to keep that empty, at least for the time being, and dropping in the mixture of black and the mixture of black with green grey or olive green like this. Because we're working wet and wet, yet again, the paper is doing the hard work for us by letting that paint softly merge into the wet paper. And I'm just adding a tiny bit of shaping underneath the glass jar like this. And using a damp brush to merge the colour out a little bit. When the paint is dry, I've cleaned down my palette and I'm mixing green, grey and olive green. And I'm also mixing green grey with a tiny bit of black. This time focusing on the sepals, making sure that the initial wash is dry before I do this. You can see me adding water to the sepals like this from the tiny puddle of water that I have on the top of my palette. This is a really good tip, and it means that I'm not getting too much water on my brush rather than dipping it in the jar full of water, which would flood my brush with water, making the application a little more tricky. So there's a bit of a tip there for you. So just put a tiny bit of water onto your palette like this. And I'm dropping in the green, the olive green and the green grey, a mixture of both where I just feel it is needed onto the sepals. I don't mind if the paint is going into the pink areas. I want it to have a really softer, looser feel anyway, so I'm not being too accurate this time. Usually my paintings are far more botanical and far more sort of rigid in my painting approach, but this is a really looser style. Not a totally loose style, but a looser style to the style that maybe you're used to seeing with my painting. Using a number 4 size spotter again, and I'm just applying that paint, dropping it into the wet paper like this. And as it's drying, I'm just using the tip of my brush to gently merge the paint into the water as it dries, giving it that nice edge and definition. And a tiny bit of green onto the outside of that petal there. I'm dropping in the darker green mix, so we have the green grey with a tiny bit of black onto the outside edge of the stem like this. So now that that paint is dry, I'm using the tip of my brush to add some definition to the area where we can see the reflection. Just copying roughly what I see on the photograph. And once I've applied the paint, I'm just blending it in with a damp brush. I'm just mixing a tiny bit more of the watered down version of the black there to create a little bit more shape. You really don't have to be too fussy with this. It's just giving the illusion of water and shine and gloss. Really easy to do. Stress-free painting and being as creative as you want to be, and just enjoying the process and making time for yourself. This is a number 0 size spotter. I'm just adding a little bit of sharpness, sharpening up my edges here and there where I feel it is needed. Picking up the drier paint on the palette on the bottom left hand side there, as you can see, and outlining the outside edge, the left hand side of the stalk here, and once again just blending it in, just giving it a little bit more definition. Even though it's a slightly looser style, we still want some of the edges to look quite sharp. So picking up some of that watered down black and just mixing it in here and blending those colours together. Now, if you do like botanical painting and would prefer to do something a little more detailed or a lot more detailed, we do have a Patreon site where we have a number of different tier levels that you can subscribe to every month and have weekly tutorials which are more of a vlog style, as well as full-length botanical art tutorials. And I will link that in the description underneath this video if you're interested in joining us there. Plus, it's a way of you helping support my channel. So if that's something that appeals to you, then do take a look. So I'm adding the mid dark tone here. So we have black with a bit of water and just adding a little bit more definition where I feel it is needed. So we have our light tones and our mid tones and our dark tones, which gives our photograph, which gives our painting a little bit more depth. Even though it's loose, we still want it to look as if it has tonal value, and darker values are obviously as important. So we're just dropping in these darker values here and outlining the base of that jar, which really makes it stand out. And I'm just adding a little bit of the dark, sort of the mid black tone here. This is just the watered down black colour because I felt that the glass jar was a little bit too pale. It needed a little bit of something, so I'm just adding a little bit of the mid tone here to give it a bit of zhuzh. Now that everything's dry, I've cleaned down my palette and we're going to mix some more of the red tones, sorry, the pinky red tones. So we have the permanent red, and this is a slightly thicker mix, but it's still quite watery. And we have crimson lake, so we have our warm tone and our cool tone colour. So if you'd like to know the difference between warm and cool tones, in its simplest term, warm colours have a sort of yellowy undertone and cooler tones have more of a bluey undertone. But don't worry too much about that at the moment. So once again, working wet in wet, I'm dropping in these colours just sort of randomly really, where I feel I want to add a little bit more depth of colour. So just dropping those colours in into the wet paper once again. And you can see how, although we have another layer underneath it, you can still see that paint just dropping in beautifully and giving that really soft blur. So you can see by dropping that colour in wet again, we're creating another layer of paint and just creating a little bit more drama within the rose. I have a mix of green grey, which is slightly off shot there, and I'm just dropping it into the wet mix and I'm letting it blur into the petals because I really want the rose to have a sort of softer feel to it. So by letting that green colour merge into the wet petals, I think it looks really, really nice and just very, very soft. I'm just using my brush to push the paint into the pencil line a little bit. And now I'm using just a plain water glaze to soften everything through. The paint has to be really dry to do this, and I'm just taking the harder edges away by using a soft number 6 size spotter, or any soft brush that you have will work, and just gently moving the paint around to soften the hard edges. Now that everything is dry, I'm using a number 0 size brush to add a little bit more colour to the tips of some of the petals like this, creating a little bit of text. You don't have to be too fussy with this. As I've said, it's more of a kind of more relaxed style painting, if you like. And just using the colours to add a little bit more shading here and there. This is a Crimson Lake with a tiny bit of the light black colour on the base. And once I've applied the paint wet on dry, I'm just using a clean brush to blend the colours into the existing washes. By the way, if you are enjoying this video and you haven't already subscribed to our channel, then do consider subscribing. We have brand new videos coming out every single Tuesday, so please consider subscribing and hitting the bell notification so that YouTube will let you know. Also, if you are enjoying this video, then please give it a thumbs up. It's a way of letting YouTube know that you're enjoying my content. I'm applying the black mix with a tiny bit of green grey to the base of the leaf here, where it's shining underneath the vase like this. And just continuing to build up the colours. And just adding a tiny bit of the watered down black colour onto the top of some of the petals. There's still quite a way to go on this painting, but it really is a matter of repeating the process. So I'm going to stop talking, let you listen to some music, relax and watch me paint.